Hello, and thank you for joining me on a mini lecture on a very important topic in anthropology, which is race and ethnicity. My name is Holly Antel. I am an independent researcher in math, specifically Boolean algebra, um, and other types of related math. Um, I am also researching areas of philosophy and psychology and ethics. And with ethics, of course, includes a lot of critique of legal systems and the law as it's practiced in the United States, um, which has a little bit to do with my discussion today, the theory of race and ethnicity. Currently, race is defined as just a social construct made up by racist people during periods of colonization. Race doesn't exist outside of this, negative social construct. So, like, race is defined as intrinsic to racism. Um, but in this portfolio, I break down why that's not the case. And I propose what I hope is a case for distinct races do exist. They can be biologically identified. Um, and like, but doing this as a bridge towards ending racism once and for all. I unpack kind of the negative things about saying that race doesn't exist and saying that's a social construct and kind of the negative impacts on that and other things within this theory. Um, so I will share my screen. So, like, my mission statement for this portfolio proposes novel generalized frameworks for defining, understanding, and locating race and ethnicity for the purpose of promoting identity, eradicating racism, and establishing an equitable society. My goal with this is I want to lay the groundwork for utopian society, free from social harms and unnecessary suffering. It's really as simple as that. I think we have all the ingenuity, technology, and resources needed to ensure a healthy and fair society for everybody, uh, regardless of money considerations, and eradicate capitalism-based survival within society. Think we can have capitalism, just not have it be a survival capitalism. It's kind of like the Hunger Games, in a lot of ways, not to diminish the very big harm it has. Um, I've been doing a lot of recent science in areas of like physics and ethics and like super fun logic and algebraic logic reasoning and stuff like that. It kind of goes a little bit beyond Boolean. And but my academic and kind of like my first background in terms of like what I was passionate about was racial justice and social justice. And I also have a big academic background, and my major is going to be social theory and practice. And it was based on anti-racism. So I studied a lot in anti-racism, and I think one thing I can contribute with my recent adventures in science and reasoning and logic and just kind of like breaking down things to their like fundamental concepts. I'm really good at that. And I think it's a cool talent to have, and other people probably have it out there too. But it's really necessary and needed to apply this talent to reorganizing society. And building a better society that is fair and equitable. Because ultimately, there are some like good math and logic and science built into some of our systems, but over the years, they've been really geared and R&D has been done, for the development of like kind of the evil ills in our society of like control and exploitation. Um, and it's been an ongoing problem. Racism is very entrenched into American society. Um, my I am most in tune with anti-Black racism because as an American, that's the most prominent and terrible racism that's going on in this country. Next would be colonization done onto indigenous people of this country. I was actually inspired to do this because on Twitter I saw someone post, he was one of the original authors of the Sulan movement, and they are a ethnicity. Um, and they identify as being the descendants of chattel slavery in America. Um, which I think that it's definitely something. Um, but unfortunately, like the way science describes race and ethnicity right now, it's hard to like validate what they're trying to do, what they're trying to say. Um, I think it's possible that, they could have biological markers and like different things could have developed that could be shared within like their like historical ethnic ancestry. I think we can do stuff to like locate stuff biologically based on ethnicity as well as race. Um, in this portfolio, I propose locating race via hair. Um, because in cosmetology, there's like four overall types of hair. I have a type three something. Um, and but I think hair can be more granularly like kind of categorized, and we can do actual racial identification through hair. And kind of the one of the principles I'm thinking about, like I'm applying to that is that like, race is ultimately about phenotyping. All races are equal and one's not better than the other because it's different. Um, but it shut my auto, it's spam call coming in. Um, race represents different, it's a positive attribute of humans. It helps us to have genetic variation for both attractiveness and like health reasons, and evolving our genetics in the right direction. Uh, so race is a very good thing. And like race lacks a definition like that. That would like, why do we have differences in how we look and stuff like that if we don't have differences? And nothing really addresses why they exist. And saying that race doesn't exist kind of gaslights the reality of how people are treated and how people perceive themselves and self-identify. Um, so um, anti-racism is more difficult and complex than law. To be really involved in anti-racism and to be really involved in like speaking about it extensively or getting in online debates, which is awful but necessary sometimes. But it also having to like speak truth to power with it, as it's historically been done. And it's the problem is that you have to confront law and like use law to tell it where it's wrong and needs to change. Um, And then even if you do that successfully, there's so much gaslighting and fallacy that goes into our legal system, uh, and with lawyers and stuff like in uh, parts of the justice system that are geared towards kind of circular arguing and reasoning. Uh, Another aspect that makes it really difficult is that, you know, people are self-referencing lived experiences that are often traumatic. Um, and having to defend that those lived experiences are bad and that this shouldn't be happening, and that there's people responsible for doing it and they should stop. Like having to defend that right outright, um, while it's simultaneously being denied uh, by an opposing party. Doing changes in the legal system is very rough. Um, and it takes an extensive emotional labor, and it's really dramatic. Um, so I don't like slow progress, and part of this portfolio I hope is to like think of ways where we can speed up progress. And that's kind of why I do these sciences, is that like I really try to lay the groundwork for like, all right, if I want to say that we need a better society, how does a better society actually function? How does that work? Where does that start? I've been kind of searching for that over the last couple of years. Over this past year, I've been really inspired to create a lot of work because I think I found those kind of like starting points for how we can better organize different institutions. And psychology is what I focus the most on. And I'm really interested in studying psychology of racial minorities um, because I think because of racism, it's my psychological theory is all about the high stress personality, which I redefine as the cluster B personalities, and it really takes into account environmental factors, including intersections of racism. Um, and Kimberly Crumshaw, as I let's see here, she developed the intersectional theory, but it's just a really insidious problem that like has so many layers to it, and there's so much circular logic and reasoning leverage against it. Um, People in anti-racism are very precise with their language, logic, and reasoning, and you have to be because um, you often get uh, debated and gaslit through like Juris Doctorate language, like professional language. Like it teaches people how to argue instead of how to like, you know, come to a conclusion, which is why like I'm trying to develop ways that like universalized ways that can be applied for psychological diagnostics, which is like my medical theory psychology. I think that same principle should be applied to a justice system. Like you should be able to have like a framework where like you answer yes or no. You should be able to like very pinpoint using a lot of logic and a lot of math if someone is guilty or not. And you can hold everyone to a same standard. And it's like the conjecture between lawyers and like who's right, who's wrong, if this or whatever. It's like it should just be point blank. Is there enough evidence? Is this really a crime? Um, and so my stuff is really about trying to like get those basics going. Like with psychology is coming up with like simple standardized tests to like indicate um illness or not. With high stress personalities, like the different take on the cluster B personalities, seeing them as both personalities and also disorders when that does happen. Um, but with racism, people are constantly under stress and trauma because usually the lower economic status, as well as they just deal with racism uh, all the time. And so I think my psychology theory is really beneficial, and I'm trying to be beneficial to people of rich minorities because um, they deal with a lot of undue stress and pressure, which has effects behaviorally and with our well-being and emotions and stuff like that. So, um, but one thing I do appreciate about the anti-racist community is how precise they are with language. Um, a lot of semantic drift in America happens because of Black people. AAB has a very big influence on the semantic drift of the overall English language here that I can observe. And so I've done kind of the same thing. Uh, Politeness and niceness to me are points of pain. Niceness is behavior, I think, that just really just tries to smooth over conflict and tries to avoid conflict. Um, and it's dishonest. So what makes politeness and niceness not so great or possibly value negative is that they're oftentimes dishonest. They don't have to be dishonest. Um, when you're first meeting people, it's good to be polite and respectful and give them the benefit of the doubt in that situation and to have like um agreeableness between people. Politeness isn't inherently bad, but how it's practiced and how it's viewed and like the level of expectation that it is placed onto people is not necessarily good. Um, and these are also both part of the social contract. So it's just what everyone expects everyone to kind of do, or just kind of unspoken rules that everyone kind of agrees upon for how society currently operates. We all show up to work, act a certain way, go to the grocery store, act a certain way. We live our lives and take care of ourselves while acting a certain way. And the way that you're acting is the social contract. And the deviance from that is usually seen as bad. Usually you'll end up in jail or in a hospital or something like that. Um, So I point out the definitions later in this about how they define race and ethnicity. Ethnicity is a little better defined than races. Um, but race just kind of defined based on racism. And I think it should be completely separate from racism in its definition. Um, so this theory proposes the possibility of a global pattern of fundamental groups of natural human phenotype genetic variation, which stands as an alternative to having more complex species variation in the human genome. Race is a distinct pattern of phenotyping differentiation and phenotypic evolution within the human population, and they also represent slight variations in other areas of genetics and biology that can be located across groups. So, race is a positive feature among human differentiation that makes our species more fit, and racial differences have contributed positively to the biological evolution of our species. So, race inequality can have impacts uh, on your life and health and well-being and stuff like that, but race alone, it's just a little bit of phenotyping different. It's just a little bit of phenotyping and other variation to make our species viable. Um, I believe it's an important part of our species. I believe we were probably patterned and there's a underlying pattern of race uh, that can probably be uncovered. And we probably have more than just those in terms of races today. And the original races may or may not even exist now. They could be, uh, different. There's a lot to be studied. Race is not well studied. It's not even defined in science and anthropology. Um, I propose tricho-phenotyping or using hair as a classification for race. There's 4 different hair types that are um, formally recognized in cosmetology and other areas. Mine's a type 3 something. And it's definitely a way that because uh, race speaks to phenotyping, um, how we should be able to marker it or identify it would be through something that is phenotypic, like hair texture, hair color, which is hair melanin. Um, because race pertains to phenotyping primarily. It's like no race is superior, no race is better. It's just our genetic variation to help keep our gene pool strong. Um, just really pertains to phenotyping. So there should be like a phenotypic way we can observe it. And like it'd be really difficult to do it with skin and skin tone just from a practicality standpoint. Plus, that's very colonialistic way of viewing it through the white gaze. So we talk about the male gaze and feminism, and I talk about the white gaze and anti-racism. Bleh. Uh, and then ethnicity is kind of like how we make race our own. How we identify with groups, and they're usually across racial lines, um, or lines that like groups identify. Large cultural groups of ethnicities are generally of the same uh, phenotypic expression. Um, but ethnicity is also something like, you could argue that someone representing a sports team is like an ethnicity in the United States. Like if we can have minor kind of ethnicities, depending on region and stuff like that. Um, or at least nationalism can be, or like, patriotism can be seen as an aspect of ethnicity as well. But these are very ill-defined, as we'll see. And then these are just kind of other types of phenomena. Um, one of the misconceptions that like racism suggests is that like race exists to designate superiority. That's wrong. No, absolutely not. Um, that's how it's been taken. That's why racism exists. Well, it's an aspect of racism. So all the sciences claim there's a zero biological basis for race. However, they claim to disprove it, uh, that race can be biologically. quantified or qualified. And my theory stands is, possible, and they haven't disproven it. So they're not done. They have to disprove my theory here to really say that they can disprove that race exists. Um, so I think one of the biggest roadblocks probably in anti-racism is like not having a theory of race and ethnicity out there, not having a fundamental framework. Um, and I hope this can like add to it and kind of, organize people in terms of uh how race is understood. Because racism is a big problem outside of America too, and it happens differently across the world. The most insidious racism can kind of be understood between Black and white people in America, but white people are not everywhere. And there's so many different types of racism and terrible stuff that happens out there. So it's all pretty bad. Um, but hopefully we can be on the path finally of getting rid of that. Um, Another big problem is that like science says race doesn't exist outside of a construct and it's a racist construct anyway. But it's like government forms and IDs like look for this kind of information. Like it's not explicitly put on IDs that I've seen, but it is, it always voluntarily identified, but they're looking for that information. Um and this definition that race is just this, social construct that happened because of colonialism is like, it makes an aspect of identity about how someone is negatively perceived. And it's like, you ask someone they're Black, they don't think about their Blackness with what white people think about it. It's not how they understand their own Blackness. They don't understand race through racism. So, and so by saying that race is defined in that way through racism only, just kind of like negates the validity of someone identifying with that. But at the same time, like someone says they're Black, not many people are gonna be like, that doesn't exist. But if they were to like look into it, they would see if that's like there's no conventional definition other than it's just like a racist construct. That doesn't actually exist biologically. But I do think, well, we could define races with hair texture and color. The key would be defining like explicit categories, but I feel like there could be like research or previous research on hair could be gathered to possibly do that. If not hair, then something else phenotypic uh, to measure. Because if race is about phenotype, really just kind of genetic variation, then it will be something that should be measurable by traits. So the Encyclopedia Britannica defines race as the idea that the human species is divided into distinct groups on the basis of inherited physical and behavioral differences. Genetic studies in the late 20th century refuted the existence of biogenetically distinct races. Genetic studies refuted the existence of biogenetically distinct races. And scholars now argue that races are cultural interventions reflecting specific attitudes and beliefs that were imposed on the different populations in the wake of Western European conquest beginning in the 15th century. So the attitudes and beliefs, they really gloss over. It's not attitudes, it's racist attitudes and beliefs. Specifically what they're referring to. And Western European conquest. Conquest is like what they're saying, colonization, I guess. But then it's also this that governments and businesses are collecting data based purely on right. Like if the only definition of race is racism, then like, okay, why are you collecting this racist data? You say it's racist. All of academia and science says that race is racist, right? Anything that says that race exists, if you say race exists, it's racist to say that race exists, but it's not racist to ask for it. But so they're saying it's racist purposes only. So it's like, all right, so is this for racist purposes only? Probably, I would say. Government doesn't really have a great history of being good to Black people. So, or people of really any minority uh race. Minority here. Yeah, probably not minority in terms of population worldwide. I don't know the stats. Um, but yeah, I think it's controversial to say that acknowledging race itself is racist. So it's like, and that's like the what makes anti-racism such a frustrating, which makes like critiquing law and the justice system, which is best done through anti-racism and civil rights methods. It's so exhausting because it's so contradictory. And once you see the contradictions, they don't stop. They need to figure out how to articulate how this isn't, this is not good for science and academia to have these official definitions that are, um, inherently racist. And then you're collecting that data. You're admitting to being racist still. Cool. Uh, that's what it says to me. Um, but I think hair is a good way to gather data on race and then later ethnicity. But I think like if we biology is not research with respect to race, this as far as we know and we're told. Um, but I mean, look at any recent history of the government admitting they did something terrible, like with the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Um, so I can't imagine anything that the government will tell us about in a few decades or whatever from now is going to be good, in terms of anything going on with race in terms of science. And them defining it is that like it doesn't exist in science. It's like, if you say that, then we have to talk about where you say it does, I think. But uh, regardless, we do have like visible differences between each other. There are people that look alike and people that don't, based on phenotypes like skin tone and hair and stuff like that. So there are like ethnicities or races or however you want to look at them, like there is a distribution of physical features that follows patterns that is plain to see. And if that's occurring, they probably follow patterns that we can logically define, and mathematically define as well. Um, so even if it's not hair, I'm sure there are other ways that we could discover ethical approaches of defining race, and that we should, because people get mistreated based on how they look. Um, and that should end. Uh, and too much has been said trying to argue for why it should end, I think. Um, so these are the four hair types. The original graphic for this is a little bit more racist. It called the coily section kinky. No, no, that's what it was felt about. Um, but coily kinky is the polite way uh to say it. But so in genetics, they already do like see differences in terms of small but measurable low frequency differences. Um, I don't know enough about genetics to explain that thoroughly. Um, but from what I do know, uh, there are similarities and differences that can be traced in parts of genetics. So it'd be really easy to do it. I brush my hair and I like pull like stuff out from the root every time. I don't know how that works on all types of hair, but uh, I feel like testing this could be very non-invasive and easy and fun. And doing it through hair takes away from the quote unquote white gaze or the colonialistic gaze. Um, and it, there's a lot of, Black identity around Black hair because it's beautiful. Um, and so I think this like celebrates that. It's about celebrating our diversity. Um, and really understanding who we are. And like, especially if you're doing science behind the scenes, it isn't ethical. It's like the more that we know, the less they can do that is harmful. Um, which is like that's another frustration of anti-racism. It's like it's happening everywhere. Like they're coming at you at all ends in terms of civil rights issues, and it's just like a monster being at your feet. But I have a theory on how you can pull the plug on it. Um, if this theory gets out there and gets talked about in any kind of way, it will definitely try to get used for what it's intended not to do, which is promote racism. I'm sure people could look at this and interpret it in racist ways and, have something to say. So, and like, I'm working hard and so are a lot of people about like, getting freedom and justice and all of the necessary ethical stuff instilled into our society. And it's been slow moving, but it doesn't have to be. And it won't always be, I don't think. You know, um, Knowing that we can all have a better shared quality of life and then not pursuing it when it's really easy. It's easy physically, it's not easy in principle for whatever reason. Um, but I think a lot of, you know, our problems with society and, voluntarily participating in these self-destructive systems that are destructive to our quality of life and our well-being and stuff like that. Um, a lot of why a broken society is still functioning is like the same kind of like fallacies and misguidedness of racism. Like I think it's very connected. Um, they're kind of two symptoms of the same disease. Um, Racism and uh, other social problems. All social problems stem from, basic things of basic structures of inequity and unfairness and power disparities and the privileged versus the exploited class. So it's having an equal class of all people. Um, and in anti-racism has always been a lot about labor. It's anti-racism plus communism has always scared the feds. So that's why I try to talk really nicely about capitalism. I don't want to stir up too much trouble with gov. Um, but anytime you challenge racist institutions, so basically our entire legal system needs a redo. Everything needs a redo in society because most of it is racist. It just needs a redo, take out the racism. Basically, you got a brand new system that works probably so much better. Just like look for the racism and then take it out. That's probably how you got to fix things in the world. So racism is a big contributing factor to a lot of problems we have in society. And I hope this gets out there. I hope this gets seen and, kind of forces a discussion of like, how do we change society for the better? That is definitely my goal. Um, it's going to be important to, develop a good language surrounding this kind of research and to like really make sure anti-racism is in charge of where it heads. Um, I think race is fundamental to the human species. Racism is not, but because racism exists, anti-racism is the equal and opposite arc towards justice, dealing with it until it's, eradicated. Um, so, affirmative action and diversity, but they get talked about as awful. Um, and they don't really do much. And what little they do is probably taken away by this administration. You know, both both parties are up to the same game and it's boring. It's rigged and its time is up uh in a lot of ways, especially if you listen to the international leadership um and what they signal with how they talk about us here in the United States. She's talking about how steps are taken to not be racist. Be a lot of work to outline it. I kind of want to like give a very brief overview of things, see how it's received for like proceeding. Um, like I was talking about earlier, I'm really interested about, extending racial studies into psychology, um, because I'm very curious about how, intergenerational trauma has impacted Black people. So I'm particularly fascinated by the Sulan, hope I'm pronouncing that right, ethnicity. Um, because I'm sure the intergenerational trauma then just all that like impacts genetics, impacts who you are, impacts your biology, impacts you, your soul, your body. Um, and so like identifiers that can definitely be, I think, discovered even biology, but they can definitely be identified socially. Um, which is what ethnicity does generally. Um, but I really want to apply psychology in terms of like racial studies because I think that's where it will be best utilized. Um, because minority groups have been on the negative end of where psychology has progressed and where health in general has progressed. Um, and not defining race outside of racism really makes it so that like we can't talk about Black women mortality, maternal mortality rates. Like that's a thing. But, adding the existence of race and being able to like study it further and like we can see what's going on and like really hone in on the problem. The more we know about the person involved. A lot of medicine and science has been done to like control people. Like research has been like your especially psychology about like controlling or prediction. Pretty awful. Psychology has a lot of awful history. Some of it is so horrible to read through. Um, but stuff hasn't been motivated or put into the right direction. But it can be, especially as it pertains to race. Um, I want to think more about this area of like how it started, how it emerged. But I would need probably more information, studies of like really talking to people and to see how racism is really done across the world. Um, because a lot of what can be, read or in the media here in America is different, and there's always a propaganda filter. Whenever it's translated, there's always a propaganda filter by one government or another. Um, when you try to pay attention to the international uh zeitgeist. But I maintain that ending racism from the most practical standpoint, like it's not about figuring out how to teach racists better on how not to be racist, not touch. It's not figuring out how to motivate them to not be racist, to have an onus on people that like you are physically and emotionally and energetically responsible for motivating people to not, participate in systemic abuse against you. Like that's unreasonable. Um, So it's like the biggest underlying factor is inequality, income inequality mainly. Um, we don't have to compete for survival using money, and it's like a human choice. And the way it's done is awful. Um, and it reinforces hierarchy, and hierarchy is reinforced by racist beliefs. Um, I think that if we approach the research of race and ethnicity differently, um, through this framework, we'll see that I think racism is actually a reaction to ethnicity. Um, I think that people are perceived differently within racial groups based on ethnic affiliation or how people project ethnic affiliation. As much as race is seen as like what people see onto you rather than how you identify, and ethnicity is seen as how you identify or people see onto you. They're both. They're both self-identifying and they're both people project onto you. And so like projected or actual ethnicity, I think, is what causes racism. So, because ethnicity and race are so closely tied together, it can be confused as racism, but I think it actually is a reaction to ethnicity. Um, and like I'm very interested in how like shared group habits can like change physical featuring and like how like your diet affects how you develop and stuff like that. Because so much goes into that, and that will go into like race and ethnic studies. It could be really cool to study this kind of thing, or to see what kind of like research, can be started because of foundation for describing race and ethnicity. Um, because I think that like what makes us different, what makes us the same. People are very afraid of discussing that or quantifying that because of like a competitive hierarchy. But it's like we don't need to see things through constant competition and like having to compete to survive through capitalism, where these are like super unfair and rigged systems. It's awful. And we've been adapting to that unnaturally. I don't think it's meant to be like that under any circumstance. Competition can be healthy, but when it's for survival and when it's unfair and when it's rigged and also for survival, it's just completely traumatic and wrong. Um, and like if we can just get basic needs met, everyone has equal access to housing and transportation, and they have food, those met. You can have an ethical capitalism, fund that, as well as make a high profit for non-essentials. So, and things can be done differently and like the hoarding of resources and rare earths and stuff like that. Like stuff can be like, and it's also about like exploiting, and like using up it as fast as possible and going through it. And so like different approaches should also be done, not constantly drill baby drill, none of that shit. So like, um, it's the most reasonable way to end racism is to end financial disparity, because that's the weapon of racism is financial disparity, and that's across all cultures. Racism in other parts of the world, the poor ones end up being the ones that have the most racism happening towards them. Um, so ending financial disparity and unhealthy competition within capitalism to have very rich people at the expense of a lot of poor people, like ending those principles from our society is fundamental. Um, and doing that, it's the means of communication, the means of production. People talk about that a lot. I wouldn't know where to start. I'm not really well studied in socialism or revolutions or stuff like that. Um, but from a practical standpoint, that's kind of like the problem that no one's talking about. Like capitalism is terrible, it's exploitative, it sucks. It's the product of racism and all these terrible things. And we can do all these things better. Uh, and me and others are producing frameworks for how this stuff can be done better. It just needs people to agree and do what it takes to make change. Um, but yeah, this basically concludes my portfolio, my overall kind of theory on race and ethnicity. It's only the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because I really want to make sure I get feedback and insight from, people of racial minority groups. I identify with one myself, but there are many others out there that should definitely, I want to hear from them uh, before exploring this further. But I hope this is a good contribution to racial justice and social justice and ending racism. Is really my goal. Um, and a good starting point, like, what's one of the biggest problems? Well, we don't even define race formally or officially. That's a big problem. So, um, I hope that actually solves something, can help move society in the arc towards, justice and freedom. So, uh, that's my goal. Thank you so much for watching this, especially if you made it the whole way through. My name is Holly Antel. I'm the creator of these theories in anthropology, the theory of race and ethnicity. Um, this is also based on my medical theory of psychology. Uh, I am doing this independently. It is unpaid labor, creating these and trying to make science accessible and learning accessible to everyone. So I definitely appreciate donations. My hashtag is CoffeeCrow420 on Cash App. But thank you so much for watching and caring about racial justice. Thank you.